The fourth command ship was massive beyond imagination. It stretched 20 kilometers from front to back, covered in layers of adaptive armor and bristling with weapons that could destroy entire cities. But most terrifying was the planet killer device charging at its center, glowing with enough energy to crack a world in half. Li Hyun rode the mother dragon through the deadly space between enemy vessels. Plasma beams and energy missiles filled the air around them, but the dragon flew with impossible grace, dodging attacks that should have been unavoidable. 5 hours until the weapon fires, Choi Mira announced through their mental link. She was coordinating the final assault from another dragon across the battlefield. All teams are in position. Through the psychic network, Li Hyun could feel the determination of every human and dragon involved in the desperate mission. This was not just about saving one planet anymore. The Vorth had transmitted data about human-dragon cooperation to their entire empire. If they succeeded in destroying Kairos, they would know exactly how to counter similar alliances in the future. Earth would be defenseless. "Baby dragons, are you ready?" Li Hyun asked the small creature on his shoulder. The baby dragon chirped with fierce confidence. All across the battle, dozens of young dragons were preparing for the most dangerous mission of their lives. They would infiltrate the command ship's computer systems and try to turn the planet killer weapon against the Vorth fleet itself, but they had to get inside first. The mother dragon folded her wings and dove straight at the command ship's heavily armored hull. Automated defense systems fired thousands of shots at them, but the dragon twisted through the air like she was dancing rather than flying. At the last moment before impact, she spread her wings and landed gently on the ship's surface. Her claws found purchase on the metal hull that was constantly reshaping itself to resist different types of attack. The armor is adapting to expect plasma breath and physical strikes. Dr. Kim Nara reported from her position on another dragon, but it has no protocols for emotional energy. This was their secret weapon. Through months of fighting together, humans and dragons had discovered that their psychic connection could channel pure emotional force into physical effects. Love, anger, determination, and hope could become actual energy that no mechanical system could predict or counter. The mother dragon pressed her claws against the ship's hull and let her emotions flow into the metal. Grief for her destroyed homeworld, love for her children, fierce protective instincts toward her human friends. The metal began to vibrate and crack under the assault of raw feeling. Li Hyun and his team jumped through the opening into the ship's interior. They found themselves in corridors filled with mechanical drones and automated systems, all designed to repel boarders using logical military tactics. But the human dragon teams did not use logical military tactics, Park. Do-hyun fired his hybrid weapon while singing a lullaby his grandmother had taught him as a child. The plasma burst followed the rhythm of the song, creating patterns that made no tactical sense but felt emotionally right. Enemy drones could not predict where the next shot would go, because it was guided by childhood memories rather than targeting computers. Dr. Kim Nara used her scientific training to analyze enemy weaknesses, then attacked completely different locations because the baby dragon on her shoulder found them more interesting. Her scanner became a musical instrument that played dragon songs while mapping enemy positions. Choi Mira coordinated their advance by telling stories about her home on Earth. As she spoke about familiar places and beloved people, the dragons shared her memories through the psychic link. This created emotional resonance that confused enemy sensors designed to track logical thought patterns. The baby dragons were having the most success of all. They plugged directly into enemy computer systems and began playing elaborate games with the artificial intelligence. They taught weapon systems to compose poetry. They made navigation computers draw pictures of flowers. They turned the ship's repair systems into musical orchestras that played dragon songs. The Vorth artificial intelligence became completely overwhelmed trying to counter attacks that were based on joy, creativity, and friendship rather than military strategy. "We're approaching the central core," Li Hyun announced as they fought their way deeper into the massive ship. The planet killer weapon was housed in a chamber larger than a sports stadium. Energy crackled between enormous mechanical devices as the weapon charged toward firing capacity. Automated systems monitored every aspect of the process, ready to counter any logical attempt at sabotage. But the human dragon teams were not planning logical sabotage. The baby dragon on Li Hyun's shoulder jumped down and approached the central control system. Instead of trying to destroy it, The small creature began playing with it like a toy. It made the charging displays flash in pretty colors. It taught the targeting computer to draw pictures of dragon families playing together. Most importantly, it convinced the weapon system that the real threat was not the planet below, but the other Vorth ships in orbit. It's working, Dr. Kim Nara said in amazement. The baby dragon is reprogramming the weapon by playing games with it. Other human dragon teams were having similar success throughout the ship. Everywhere they went, baby dragons turned serious military systems into playgrounds for creativity and fun. Weapons became art projects. Communication systems became storytelling networks. Navigation computers became dance partners. The fourth command ship began to lose all coordination as its systems were overwhelmed. Biological inputs that somehow worked perfectly. Weapon. Charging at 90%. Choi Mira warned. But now the weapon was no longer targeting Cairo 7. The baby dragon's games had convinced it that the other Vorth ships were actually the enemy. The planet killer device was preparing to fire on its own fleet. All teams, evacuate now, Lee Hyun ordered. The human dragon teams fought their way back through corridors filled with confused and malfunctioning enemy systems. Mechanical drones wandered in circles, singing dragon songs they had learned from hacked audio systems. Automated weapons fired at their own shadows because baby dragons had taught them to fear darkness. The mother dragon was waiting on the ship's hull, along with dozens of other dragon families. As the humans climbed aboard, she launched into space just as the planet killer weapon reached full charge. The massive energy beam fired not at Cairo 7, but directly into the center of the Vorth fleet. Ship after ship exploded in chain reactions as the weapon designed to destroy planets tore through their own forces. The command ship is destroying its own fleet, Park Do-hyun said in amazement. Within minutes, the space around Cairo 7 was filled with wreckage from hundreds of Vorth vessels. The few surviving enemy ships fled the system, as fast as their damaged engines could carry them. But this was about more than winning one battle. The baby dragon, on Lee Hyun's shoulder, chirped excitedly as it showed him data stolen from the Vorth computer systems. Technical specifications, star charts, and most importantly, communication records with the main Vorth Empire. They've been sending reports about us to their central command, Dr. Kim Nara realized. The entire Vorth Empire now knows about human-dragon cooperation. Is that good or bad? Choi Mira asked. Lee Hyun smiled as he felt the answer through the psychic network. Dragons across the galaxy, hidden survivors who had been afraid to fight back, were receiving the same information. They now knew that the Vorth could be defeated. They knew that alliance with other species could create power beyond anything the mechanical empire could counter. It's the beginning of the end for the Vorth Empire, Lee Hyun said as the mother dragon flew back toward the crystal caves. Lee Hyun looked down at Cairo 7. The planet was scarred from battle, but it was alive. More importantly, it was now home to something completely new. Humans and dragons were no longer separate species. They were family. In the caves below, human children who had been born during the months of preparation played games with baby dragons. They spoke both languages naturally and could use both human logic and dragon instincts without thinking about it. Dr. Kim Nara had discovered that prolonged psychic connection was causing evolutionary changes in both species. Humans were developing enhanced intuition and emotional sensitivity. Dragons were gaining improved analytical thinking and technological understanding. Park Do-hyun had designed hybrid cities that were part human engineering and part dragon bioarchitecture. Choi Mira had established communication networks that connected human and dragon colonies across multiple star systems. The war against the Vorth was far from over. But now it would be fought by an alliance that grew stronger with every member species that joined. Lee Hyun felt the baby dragon settle comfortably on his shoulder as they approached their new home. Through the psychic link, he could sense dragon families across the galaxy emerging from hiding. He could feel human colony ships changing course to make contact with dragon refugees. The age of isolated species was ending. The age of true interspecies civilization was beginning. And somewhere in space, Fourth artificial intelligence systems struggled hopelessly to understand how friendship and love had become the most powerful weapons in the galaxy. Major Kim Dae-ho sat in the cockpit of his A-10 Thunderbolt II fighter plane. The old aircraft had seen better days. Paint was chipped off the nose. Bullet holes from previous battles dotted the wings. But the plane still flew. It still fought. That was all that mattered to Kim. The communication system crackled to life in his helmet. The voice belonged to Colonel Park Jin-woo from Mission Command. Bravo 77, we have an urgent mission for you. Kim pressed the radio button. This is Bravo 77. Ready to receive mission details. Major, our ground forces are trapped in Canyon 17 on planet Kepler 442b. Vorthak hover tanks have them pinned down. They need air support immediately. Kim looked at his tactical screen. The planet Kepler 442b appeared as a rotating globe covered in red warning symbols. 3 moons orbited the world. Their gravity fields created chaos in the atmosphere. No pilot wanted to fly there. Sir, what altitude do you need us to operate at? There was a pause. Then Colonel Park spoke again. His voice sounded grim. Major, the enemy tanks are protected by energy shields. Our ground weapons cannot penetrate them. The only way to destroy those tanks is to attack from directly above. You will need to fly at 60,000 feet. Kim felt his stomach drop. 60,000 feet on that planet meant certain death. The atmosphere was too thin. The gravity fields from the 3 moons made flying impossible. Every pilot in the human fleet knew this. The Vorthak aliens knew it too. That was why they operated their tanks without fear of air attack. Colonel, no atmospheric fighter has ever flown combat missions above 45,000 feet on that world. The computers cannot handle the conditions. I know, Major, but our people on the ground will die if we do not try. Kim looked out at his wingman. Captain Lee Hana flew her A-10 just off his right wing. Her plane looked as beaten up as his own. Scorch marks from laser hits covered the tail. One of her wing panels had been replaced with spare parts from a different aircraft. The colors did not match. Kim switched to the private channel. Hana, are you hearing this? Yes, sir. They want us to fly at Angel 60 on that death world. What do you think? Captain Lee was quiet for a moment. Kim could see her checking her instruments through the cockpit glass. Sir, my flight computer is already showing red warnings just thinking about those conditions. The gravitational fields will tear us apart. The thin air will not give us enough lift. Our weapon systems will not work properly. Kim understood her concerns. They were the same concerns he had. But down in that canyon, human soldiers were fighting for their lives. Sergeant Oh Min-jun was down there. Private Choi Sung-ho was there too. These were good people. They had families back on Earth. They deserved a chance to see home again. The radio crackled again. This time it was Lieutenant Colonel Shin Bo-ra from the orbital carrier UES Determination. Major Kim, I'm looking at the atmospheric readings from Kepler 442b. Flying at that altitude is suicide. The air density is only 60% of Earth normal. Your engines will lose half their power. Your weapons will lose accuracy. The gravity fluctuations happen every 12 minutes. They will throw you around like a toy. Kim studied his own readings. The numbers were terrifying. Engine efficiency would drop to 45%. Weapons accuracy would fall by 70%. The electromagnetic fields from the planet would interfere with all electronics. His smart missiles would become dumb rocks. His targeting computer would give up completely. But Kim also knew something else. The A-10 Thunderbolt II was not like other fighter planes. It was built different. The designers had made it to survive things that would destroy other aircraft. The pilots called it the Warthog because it was ugly and tough. It could fly with half its parts shot off. It could return to base with engines on fire and wings full of holes. Ma'am, the A-10 was designed to operate in the worst conditions possible. If any plane can do this mission, it is the Warthog. Colonel Shin sighed over the radio. Major, I cannot order you to take this mission. It goes against all safety protocols. If you choose to attempt it, you will be flying purely on manual control. No computer assistance. No electronic aids. Just you and the aircraft. Kim looked down at his hands on the control stick. These hands had flown combat missions for 15 years. They had fought alien fighters over the moons of Jupiter. They had provided close air support on the burning deserts of Mars. They knew how to fly when everything else failed. Ma'am, permission to speak freely? Go ahead, Major. Those soldiers in the canyon did not ask for an easy fight. They are down there doing their job even though the odds are against them. The least we can do is try to help them. Captain Lee came on the channel. Sir, if Major Kim is going, then I am going too. You do not fly alone into that mess. Kim felt a surge of pride in his wingman. Lee Hana had been flying with him for 3 years. She had never backed down from a fight. She had never left a fellow pilot behind. If he was going to attempt the impossible, He could not ask for a better pilot to watch his back. Colonel Park's voice returned to the radio. Major, the ground forces report that Vorthak reinforcements are moving toward the canyon. Time is running out. What is your decision? Kim looked at his fuel gauge. Full tanks. He checked his weapons. The GAU-8 cannon had full ammunition. The old 30mm gun was the heart of the A-10. It could punch through armor that stopped other weapons. Even if his missiles failed, the cannon would still work. He thought about the soldiers in the canyon. They were probably scared. They were probably wondering if help would come. They trusted that somewhere above the clouds, human pilots were willing to risk everything to save them. Control, this is Bravo 77. We are accepting the mission. Beginning climb to Angel 60. Copy that, Major. Good luck. Try to come home. Kim pushed the throttle forward. The twin engines of his A-10 roared louder. The plane began to climb toward the impossible altitude where no fighter had ever survived combat. Below them, the surface of Kepler 442b grew smaller. Above them waited the thin air and chaotic gravity that had killed every pilot foolish enough to challenge them. But Kim was not just any pilot. He was a major in an A-10, and he was about to prove that human determination could overcome alien certainty. Major Kim Dae-ho felt his A-10 shake as they climbed through 30,000 feet. The atmosphere of Kepler 442b was already showing its hostile nature. Strange winds pushed at the aircraft from different directions. His instruments flickered as electromagnetic fields interfered with the electronics. Beside him, Captain Lee Hana fought to keep her own plane steady. Dae-ho, I am getting weird readings on everything. My compass is spinning like a toy. The altimeter keeps jumping around. Kim looked at his own instruments. The readings made no sense. One moment his altitude showed 32,000 feet. The next moment it showed 28,000. The gravity from the 3 moons was already playing tricks on their equipment. Back on the orbital carrier, Lieutenant Colonel Shin Bo-ra watched the 2 A-10s on her tactical display. The planes appeared as small dots climbing slowly toward certain death. She had seen the intelligence reports about Kepler 442b. Every species that had tried high-altitude combat on that world had failed miserably. The Vorthak Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds, over 800 years. They had fought dozens of different alien races. All of them had tried to attack Vorthak hover tanks from above. All of them had died in the attempt. The aliens had built their entire defense strategy around this simple fact. Major Kim, Colonel Shin spoke into her microphone. I am uploading the latest intelligence about Vorthak tactics. Their hover tanks operate with complete confidence below 50,000 feet. Their energy shields are designed to stop attacks from conventional angles. No military force has ever successfully engaged them from higher altitudes. Kim studied the data as it appeared on his screen. The Vorthak tanks looked like flying metal boxes. They moved on cushions of energy instead of wheels or tracks. Their main weapons could destroy a building with one shot. Most importantly, their shields created a dome of protective energy above each tank. Control, why have other species failed at high-altitude attacks? The atmospheric conditions make accurate weapons fire impossible. The gravity fluctuations throw off targeting systems. Most pilots lose control of their aircraft and crash. The few who maintain flight cannot hit their targets. Captain Lee checked her weapon systems. Sir, my missile targeting computer is already showing errors. We are only at 35,000 feet and the system cannot lock onto anything. Kim understood the problem. Modern weapons relied on computers to guide them to targets, but computers needed stable conditions to work properly. The chaos of Kepler 442b made computer targeting useless. Down in Canyon 17, Sergeant First Class Oh Min-jun pressed himself against a rock wall. Vorthak energy blasts scorched the ground around his position. His rifle was almost out of ammunition. The enemy hover tanks moved closer with each passing minute. Colonel Park, he spoke into his radio. We need that air support now. The aliens are moving into final assault positions. Colonel Park Jin-woo crouched in the command bunker. His tactical display showed red enemy symbols surrounding the canyon. More Vorthak reinforcements were approaching from the north. If the airstrike failed, his entire battalion would be wiped out. Air support is climbing to operational altitude. ETA 20 minutes if they survived the ascent. 20 minutes felt like forever to the soldiers in the canyon. Some of them looked up at the sky, hoping to see friendly aircraft. All they saw were the 3 moons of Kepler 442b, hanging in the purple atmosphere like watchful eyes. At 40,000 feet, Kim felt his A-10 enter the first major gravity flux zone. The invisible force hit his plane like a giant hand trying to crush it. His altitude dropped suddenly by 2,000 feet. The stick in his hands fought against his grip. Warning lights flashed across his instrument panel. "Hana, you still with me?" Captain Lee's voice sounded strained. "Barely, sir. I just lost hydraulic pressure in my primary flight controls." Switching to backup systems, Kim checked his own systems. Engine temperatures were climbing toward the red zone. The thin air made his engines work harder for less power. His fuel consumption had increased by 30%. At this rate, they would not have enough fuel to complete the mission and return to base. But fuel was not their biggest problem. At 45,000 feet, the real challenge began. This was the altitude where every other species had given up. This was where the laws of physics seemed to change. Kim felt his plane buck and twist as another gravity wave hit. His artificial horizon spun wildly. For a moment he could not tell which way was up. Only years of training and instinct kept him from losing control completely. "Control, we are passing through Angels 45. Experiencing severe gravity disturbances. All electronic systems are unreliable." Colonel Shin watched the 2 dots on her screen wobble back and forth. "Major, you are entering uncharted territory. No pilot has ever maintained controlled flight above this altitude on Kepler 442b. You still have time to abort the mission." Kim thought about the soldiers in the canyon. He thought about Sergeant Oh Min-jun and the other brave people fighting for their lives. He thought about the families back on Earth who were waiting for their loved ones to come home. "Negative, Control. We are continuing the climb." At 50,000 feet, Captain Lee's plane began to shake violently. "Daeho, I am losing power in my left engine. Oil pressure is dropping fast." Kim could see smoke trailing from his wingman's aircraft. The harsh conditions were tearing their planes apart piece by piece. Any sensible pilot would turn back now. Any reasonable military commander would call off the mission, but Kim had not become a major by being sensible or reasonable. He had earned his rank by completing missions that others thought impossible. He had survived 15 years of combat by refusing to give up when things looked hopeless. "Hana, can you maintain altitude on one engine?" "I think so, sir." The A-10 was built for this kind of abuse. Kim smiled despite the desperate situation. The A-10 Thunderbolt II had earned its reputation in 100 battles. It was not the fastest fighter. It was not the prettiest, but it was the toughest. If any aircraft could survive the impossible conditions of Kepler 442b, it was the Warthog. At 55,000 feet, Kim's targeting computer finally gave up completely. The screen went black with a message: "System failure. Manual targeting required. Control, we have lost all computer assistance, flying purely on instruments and visual contact." "Copy that, Major. You are now truly alone up there." Kim looked out his cockpit window at the hostile world below. Somewhere in that maze of canyons and mountains, human soldiers were depending on him. The impossible altitude stretched ahead like a wall of death. But Kim Dae-ho had never met a wall he would not try to climb. Major Kim Dae-ho steadied his shaking A-10 at 60,000 feet and prepared for the first attack run. Through his ice-covered canopy, the Vorthak hover tanks looked like tiny spots of light scattered across the canyon floor. His targeting computer screen remained black. His missile system showed error messages. All he had was the ancient Gao-8 cannon and 15 years of flying experience. Beginning attack run, Kim announced over the radio. "Hana, stay high and watch for trouble." Captain Lee. Hana fought to keep her damaged aircraft level. "Copy that, sir. I will cover your approach." Kim pushed his stick forward and began the dive toward the canyon. Immediately, everything went wrong. The thin air provided no resistance to control his descent. His airspeed climbed dangerously fast. The gravity flux zones grabbed his plane and threw it sideways. His compass spun wildly as magnetic fields interfered with the instruments. At 55,000 feet, Kim tried to line up his shot. The hover tanks moved slowly through the canyon like glowing beetles. His gun sight showed nothing but static. The targeting system had given up completely. He would have to aim by eye alone. The first burst from his GAU-8 cannon sent 30mm rounds screaming toward the ground. The depleted uranium shells fell through 60,000 feet of hostile atmosphere. Gravity waves bent their flight path. Wind shear scattered the projectiles. Every round missed the target by hundreds of meters. Kim pulled out of his dive and climbed back toward his wingman. His engines protested as they struggled to regain altitude in the thin air. First pass was a complete miss. The atmospheric conditions are throwing off everything. Down in the canyon, the Vorthak tank commanders felt confused. Energy signatures showed weapons fire from impossible altitude. But no rounds had come close to hitting anything. Their instruments could barely detect the human aircraft in the thin air above. Warlord Thekmore studied his tactical display from inside his command hover tank. "Report, what was that weapons discharge?" His sensor operator, a young Vorthak named Velkath, checked his readings twice before responding. "Sir, it appears to be atmospheric fighters operating at altitude level 7. Impossible. No species has ever achieved combat effectiveness above altitude level 5 on this world. Check your sensors. Sensors are functioning correctly, sir. The human aircraft are maintaining flight at 60,000 of their measurement units." Warlord Thekmore felt a chill of concern. In 800 years of Vorthak expansion, no enemy had ever surprised them with new tactics. Their hover tanks were invincible precisely because high-altitude attack was impossible. Continue the assault on the ground forces. Those aircraft pose no threat if they cannot hit their targets. Back at 60,000 feet, Kim prepared for his second attack run. This time he ignored every instrument except his altimeter. He focused on feeling the aircraft instead of reading the displays. The gravity waves felt like ocean swells to his experienced hands. The atmospheric turbulence had patterns he could learn. "Hana, I'm going in again. This time I fly by instinct." Captain Lee watched her fuel gauge drop toward empty. Her damaged engine consumed twice the normal amount of fuel. "Sir, I have maybe 10 minutes of flight time remaining." "Make this count." Kim pushed into his second dive. Instead of fighting the gravity waves, he used them. When a flux zone pulled his plane sideways, he adjusted his aim in the opposite direction. When wind shear tried to scatter his rounds, he compensated by leading his target more. The Gu-8 cannon roared again. This time, the stream of depleted uranium rounds followed a different path through the chaotic atmosphere. Kim had learned from his first miss. He aimed not where the target was, but where physics would carry his bullets. The first round struck the canyon floor just meters from a Vorthak hover tank. Rock and metal exploded in all directions. The tank commander inside felt his vehicle shake from the impact. His energy shields had stopped the direct hit, but barely. "Contact!" Kim shouted over the radio. "Rounds on target." Adjusting aim for next pass, Colonel Park Jin-woo heard the explosions echoing through the canyon. For the first time in hours, he felt a spark of hope. "All units, air support is engaging enemy armor. Prepare to advance when ordered." Sergeant First Class Oh Min-jun peered over his rock cover. Dust and smoke rose from the enemy positions. The hover tanks that had seemed invincible moments before now looked vulnerable. "Colonel, the airstrike is working. The aliens are moving their vehicles." Kim climbed back to altitude for his third attack run. His engines ran so hot that warning lights flashed continuously. His fuel supply dropped toward the minimum needed for return to base. But he could see the effect of his attack. The Vorthak tanks were repositioning, trying to find cover from the impossible angle of attack. "Control, this is Bravo 77. We have achieved effective weapons delivery at Angel 60. Enemy armor is responding to our presence." Lieutenant Colonel Shin Bo-ra stared at her tactical display in disbelief. The two A-10s still showed as unstable contacts at impossible altitude, but ground observers confirmed explosions in the target area. "Major Kim, you have just done something that military science said was impossible." Kim felt a grim satisfaction as he prepared for his third dive. "Ma'am, sometimes military science needs updating." This time, Kim dove with the confidence of a pilot who understood his environment. The gravity waves no longer surprised him. The atmospheric chaos became predictable. He aimed his aircraft like a rifle, using his entire plane as a targeting system. The Gau-8 cannon fired again. 30-millimeter rounds fell like deadly rain through the thin atmosphere. Kim had learned to read the invisible forces that bent their flight path. His aim was perfect. The depleted uranium shells struck a Vorthak hover tank directly amidships. The tank's energy shields absorbed most of the impact, but the sheer kinetic energy overwhelmed the protective system. Metal plates buckled. Internal systems sparked and failed. The tank listed to one side and crashed into the canyon wall. "Direct hit," Captain Lee announced from her overwatch position. One enemy tank destroyed. The other Vorthak tanks immediately began evasive maneuvers. Their commanders finally understood they faced a real threat. The impossible had become possible. Human pilots were delivering effective fire from an altitude that should mean certain death. Warlord Thekmore watched his tactical display with growing alarm. One of his hover tanks showed as destroyed. The others reported damage from near misses. The atmospheric fighters above continued to operate despite conditions that should have killed them. "Signal Fleet Command," he ordered his communications officer. "Request immediate aerospace fighter support. The humans have achieved something we thought impossible." Captain Lee's voice crackled over the radio, strained with effort. "Daeho, my engine is about to quit. I need to head home now or I will not make it back." Kim looked at his fuel gauge. He had enough for maybe 2 more attack runs. His engines were on the edge of catastrophic failure. Every system in his aircraft screamed warnings about exceeding operational limits. But below in the canyon, he could see human soldiers beginning to advance. The destruction of one hover tank had changed the entire battle. The Vorthak forces no longer felt invincible. They were retreating to defensive positions. "Go home, Hana, you have done enough." "Sir, I am not leaving you alone up here." Kim watched his wingman's crippled A-10 trailing smoke and losing altitude. She had already achieved more than anyone thought possible. "That is an order, Captain. Get your bird home." Captain Lee reluctantly turned her aircraft toward the extraction point. Her damaged engine coughed and sputtered as she descended toward thicker air. "Good hunting, Major. Make them pay." Kim was now alone at impossible altitude, flying a dying aircraft against an enemy that had never been defeated from above. His fuel ran low. His engines overheated. His life support systems failed one by one, but he was not finished yet. Major Kim Daeho flew alone through the death zone above Kepler 442b. His A-10 shuddered and groaned as systems failed one after another. The left engine ran so hot that metal glowed red behind the intake. The right engine coughed and missed beats like a dying heart, but the tough old Warthog kept flying. Below in Canyon 17, the tide of battle had turned. The destruction of one hover tank sent shockwaves through the Vorthak forces. For the first time in 800 years of conquest, their ground armor was vulnerable to air attack. Tank commanders who had felt invincible now looked nervously at the purple sky above. Kim began his 4th attack run. This time he dove through a gravity flux zone on purpose. The invisible force grabbed his aircraft and accelerated it downward faster than any engine could manage. He used the alien world's own chaotic physics as a weapon. At 50,000 feet, he pulled out of the power dive. The stress should have torn his wings off. The G-forces should have crushed him unconscious. But the A-10 was built like a flying tank. It absorbed punishment that would destroy lesser aircraft. The GAU-8 cannon roared to life. Kim had learned to read the atmospheric chaos like a river pilot reading dangerous currents. He knew exactly where each gravity wave would push his rounds. His aim was deadly accurate. 30-millimeter shells rained down on the second hover tank. The depleted uranium rounds struck with the force of meteors. The tank's energy shields flared and overloaded. Internal explosions lit up the canyon as the vehicle died in fire and smoke. "2 down," Kim announced over the radio. On the ground, Sergeant First Class Oh Min-jun watched the second tank explode. Burning debris scattered across the canyon floor. The Vorthak infantry who had been advancing behind the armor suddenly found themselves exposed and vulnerable. "Colonel Park, the aliens are pulling back. Their armor is retreating to defensive positions." Colonel Park Jinwoo could hardly believe what he was seeing. His tactical display showed Vorthak forces in full retreat for the first time in the war. One human pilot in an impossible position was changing the entire battle. All units advanced by squads.
"Keep pressure on the enemy."
"Do not let them reorganize." Kim climbed back to 60,000 feet for another attack run. His fuel gauge showed 15 minutes remaining. His engines ran on borrowed time. Ice covered most of his instruments, but he could see more targets scattered throughout the canyon. The third hover tank tried to hide behind a rock formation. Its commander thought the stone would protect him from above. He was wrong. Kim dove at an angle that brought him over the rocks. His cannon fire struck the tank from directly overhead, punching through the thinner top armor. The tank exploded in a ball of green fire. Vorthak energy cells detonated in a chain reaction that shook the entire canyon. Rock slides cascaded down the walls as the explosion echoed through the narrow space. But Kim's success came with a price. As he pulled out of his dive, Vorthak anti-aircraft fire found his range. Energy bolts streaked up through the thin atmosphere. Most missed wildly due to the atmospheric distortion, but one beam clipped his left wing, The impact tore a hole the size of a dinner table through the wing panel. Hydraulic fluid sprayed out in a golden stream. Warning lights flashed as his flight control system compensated for the damage. Any normal aircraft would have crashed immediately. The A-10 kept flying. It was designed to survive battle damage that would kill other fighters. Backup systems engaged automatically. Manual controls remained responsive even with half the hydraulics gone. Control, this is Bravo 77. I have taken battle damage but remain operational. Lieutenant Colonel Shin Bora watched the tactical display with amazement and terror. Kim's aircraft showed as a flickering contact surrounded by warning symbols. Major, your aircraft is severely damaged. You need to return to base immediately. Negative, Control. I still have targets and ammunition. Kim began his fifth attack run. This time, 3 hover tanks concentrated their fire on his diving aircraft. The canyon filled with streaking energy bolts. The aliens had finally realized they were fighting for their lives. Kim flew through the deadly light show like a dancer moving through raindrops. He rolled left to avoid one blast. He climbed over another. He dove under a third. The gravity flux zones that had been his enemy now became his ally, pulling his aircraft in unexpected directions. The GAU-8 cannon spoke again. Kim's rounds found the 4th hover tank just as it fired at him. The tank's energy bolt passed so close to his canopy that it melted the ice covering the glass. But his shells struck home, turning another enemy vehicle into scrap metal. On the orbital carrier, Colonel Shin watched displays that showed the impossible happening. Command, we have one A-10 engaging multiple enemy armor units at 60,000 feet altitude. Pilot is achieving consistent hits despite severe atmospheric interference. The response from Fleet Headquarters was immediate. Repeat your last transmission. Did you say 60,000 feet? Confirmed. Major Kim Dae-ho is conducting effective close air support at Angel 60 on Kepler 442b. There was a long pause. Then, Colonel, if this is accurate, you are witnessing military history being made. Kim prepared for his 6th attack run. His left engine finally gave up completely. The turbofan seized with a grinding scream of tortured metal. Flames and smoke poured from the intake. But the A-10 was designed to fly on one engine. Kim shut down the burning motor and continued the attack. Flying on one engine at 60,000 feet should have been impossible. The mathematics said his aircraft would fall out of the sky, but Kim had stopped believing in impossible things. He trimmed the aircraft for single-engine flight and dove toward his next target. The 5th hover tank tried to run. Its commander opened full throttle and raced toward the canyon mouth. But there was no escape from death falling from above. Kim's cannon rounds caught the fleeing vehicle just before it reached safety. The tank cartwheeled through the air as internal explosions tore it apart. Burning wreckage scattered across the canyon floor. The Vorthak ground forces watched in shock as their invincible armor died one by one. Warlord Thekmor finally understood the scope of the disaster. Half his armor was destroyed. His infantry was retreating in panic. One human pilot had done what 800 years of Vorthak military science said was impossible. Signal retreat. He ordered his remaining forces. Withdraw to secondary positions immediately. But Kim was not finished. His fuel gauge showed 5 minutes remaining. His right engine ran so rough it would probably quit at any moment. His aircraft looked like it had flown through a metal shredder, but there were still enemy targets in the canyon. And Kim Dae-ho had never left a job unfinished. He lined up for his 7th attack run. Below him, the remaining Vorthak forces scrambled for cover. Above him, the 3 moons of Kepler 442b watched silently as one human pilot rewrote the rules of warfare. The impossible had become inevitable. The death sentence altitude had become hunting ground. And somewhere in the chaos of battle, military history was being written in depleted uranium and determination.
Major Kim Dae-ho was lining up his 7th attack run when his radar warning receiver screamed to life. The sound cut through the cockpit like a knife. High above him, 6 Vorthok aerospace fighters dove from orbit like hungry predators. These were not the slow hover tanks he had been hunting. These were elite pilots in advanced spacecraft designed to dominate both space and atmosphere. Their sleek black fighters could transition seamlessly from vacuum to air combat. Their energy weapons could vaporize a human fighter with a single hit. Control. This is Bravo 77. Multiple aerospace fighters inbound from high orbit. They are coming down fast. Lieutenant Colonel Shinbiora felt her heart sink as she watched the new contacts appear on her tactical display. Major, those are Vorthok Scythe-class fighters. You need to run immediately. Your damaged A-10 cannot match their performance. Kim looked up through his canopy at the 6 streaks of fire descending toward him. Each enemy fighter was faster than his A-10. Each carried more advanced weapons. Each was flown by a pilot with decades of combat experience. Under normal circumstances, this would be suicide. But Kim had stopped thinking about normal circumstances hours ago. Negative control. I still have ammunition and targets below. Besides, where am I supposed to run at 60,000 feet? Wing Prime Velkos led the Vorthok fighter squadron. He was a veteran of 50 space battles. He had never lost an engagement. Looking down at the single human aircraft struggling through the thin atmosphere, he felt almost insulted by the easy kill. Talon Squadron engaged the atmospheric fighter. One pass should be sufficient to destroy it. The 6 Vorthok fighters spread into attack formation, their energy weapons charged with deadly light. They had trained for this moment their entire careers. No atmospheric fighter had ever survived an engagement with. Aerospace craft Kim watched the enemy fighters position themselves above him. They moved with deadly precision, cutting off all escape routes. Their formation was perfect. Their tactics were flawless. By every rule of air combat, he was already dead. But Kim had his own rules. Instead of running or climbing, he did something the Vorthok pilots never expected. He dove straight down toward the thickest part of the atmosphere. What is he doing? Velkos demanded as he watched the human aircraft plunge toward the planet's surface. Kim pushed his dying A-10 into a screaming dive toward the gravity flux zones below. The enemy fighters followed, confident in their superior speed and weapons. They did not understand that Kim was not trying to escape. He was choosing his battlefield. At 55,000 feet, Kim hit the first major gravity well. The invisible force grabbed his aircraft and flung it sideways with tremendous force. A normal pilot would have lost control. But Kim had learned to read these deadly currents. He used the gravity flux like a slingshot. The Vorthok fighters were not prepared for the sudden course change. Their sleek designs worked perfectly in normal space or stable atmosphere. But the chaotic gravity fields of Kepler 440 turned their advanced flight computers into liabilities. Wing Prime. Velkos felt his fighter buck and twist as conflicting forces grabbed his spacecraft. What is this? My instruments are malfunctioning, sir. Gravity fields are interfering with our navigation systems, his wingman reported. I cannot maintain stable flight path. Kim smiled grimly as he watched the enemy. Fighters struggled with the same forces he had mastered. Their sophisticated computers tried to compensate for conditions that changed every second. His simple mechanical controls responded instantly to his commands. The first Vorthok fighter fired its energy cannon. The bolt should have vaporized Kim's A-10 instantly, but the gravity flux bent the shot away at the last second. The deadly beam passed harmlessly through empty space. Kim pulled out of his dive and climbed back through another flux zone. The sudden change in direction brought him directly behind the lead Vorthok fighter. Wing Prime Velkos found himself in the impossible position of being hunted by an atmospheric aircraft at altitude where no atmospheric craft should. Survive the Gale 8 cannon roared to life. 30mm rounds streaked through the thin air toward the enemy spacecraft. The Vorthok fighter's shields absorbed most of the impact. The sheer kinetic force sent it tumbling out of control. Impossible. Velkos shouted as his fighter spun through 3 gravity flux zones. How can an atmospheric craft achieve weapons lock at this altitude? Kim did not waste time answering. He rolled, inverted, and dove through another gravity well, using the planet's own physics to build impossible speed. The second Vorthok fighter tried to follow, but could not match his maneuver. Through the chaotic forces, the alien pilot's sophisticated computer systems worked against him. Every time a gravity flux hit, his flight computer tried to compensate automatically. But the corrections were wrong for the constantly changing conditions. The fighter lurched and stalled as its systems fought each. Other Kim came up behind the struggling spacecraft like a shark attacking a wounded seal. His cannon fire shredded the fighter's rear section. Internal explosions lit up the thin atmosphere as the advanced craft died in fire and debris. "One down," Kim announced calmly. Wing Prime Velkos watched one of his pilots fall burning toward the planet's surface. This was madness. Atmospheric fighters did not defeat aerospace craft. The laws of physics prevented such things. Yet he was watching it happen. All fighters concentrate fire on the human aircraft. Use maximum power settings. The remaining 5 fighters opened fire simultaneously. Energy bolts filled the sky around Kim's A-10. The canyon below lit up with reflected laser light. Any one of those shots could destroy his aircraft instantly. Kim flew through. The deadly light show like he was dancing with death. He rolled left around one blast. He climbed over another. He dove under a third. The gravity flux zones that tortured the enemy fighters became his allies. Pulling his aircraft in unexpected directions, the third Vorthok fighter made the mistake of following Kim into a particularly violent flux zone. The pilot's computer systems overloaded, trying to compensate for the impossible conditions. Warning alarms filled his cockpit as multiple systems failed. Simultaneously, Kim's cannon found the helpless fighter and tore it apart with surgical precision. Burning wreckage tumbled toward the canyon floor far below. 2 down, Kim reported to control. Lieutenant Colonel Shinbora stared at her tactical display in complete disbelief. The readings showed 1 damaged A-10 engaging 6 advanced fighters at impossible altitude. Somehow, Kim was winning. "Major, you have just achieved something that military science says cannot happen. You are defeating aerospace fighters in atmospheric combat." Kim lined up on the 4th enemy fighter. His fuel gauge showed 2 minutes remaining. His right engine missed every 3rd beat. His aircraft held together through determination and good engineering. "Ma'am, I stopped believing in impossible about an hour ago." The 4th Vorthok fighter exploded in green fire as Kim's rounds found its fuel cells.
Wing Prim.
Velkos watched another of his pilots die and felt something he had never experienced before in combat: fear below in the canyon. Human soldiers cheered as burning alien fighters fell from the purple sky. They were witnessing the impossible made real by one pilot's refusal to accept defeat. Major Kim Dae-ho faced the final 2 Vorthok fighters with less than 1 minute of fuel remaining. His right engine coughed and wheezed like a dying animal. His left wing showed more holes than metal. Ice covered every surface of his cockpit. But his cannon still had ammunition. His hands still controlled the aircraft. Wing Prime Velkos could not believe what he was witnessing. 4 of his elite pilots were dead. Their burning fighters littered the canyon below like broken toys. 1 human pilot in an ancient atmospheric craft had done the impossible. He had defeated aerospace fighters at altitude where no atmospheric plane should even fly. "This ends now," Velkos spoke to his last remaining wingman. "Full power. Maximum weapons. Destroy that human." The 2 surviving Vorthok fighters accelerated toward Kim's crippled A-10. There. Energy weapons charged to full power. Their targeting computers locked onto the damaged human aircraft. At point-blank range, even the chaotic atmosphere could not save him. Kim watched the enemy fighters close the distance. His fuel gauge showed 30 seconds remaining. His engine temperature climbed into the red zone. Every system in his aircraft screamed warnings about imminent failure. But Kim Dae-ho had spent his entire career preparing for this moment. Not this exact battle, but this choice between certain death and impossible victory. He had chosen impossible victory every time. "Control, this is Bravo 77. Fuel exhaustion in 30 seconds. Beginning final attack run." Lieutenant Colonel Shinbora gripped her console aboard the orbital carrier. "Major, you have accomplished more than anyone thought possible. You can disengage now with honor?" Kim's voice came back steady and calm. "Ma'am, there are still 2 enemy fighters threatening our ground forces. My job is not finished." Instead of running from the approaching fighters, Kim turned directly toward them. The move surprised Wing Prime Velkos completely. Human pilots were supposed to be afraid of death. They were supposed to run when faced with impossible odds. "He is flying straight at us," Velkos reported in disbelief. Does he think he can ram our fighters? Kim had no intention of ramming anything, but he understood something the alien pilots did not. They were thinking like aerospace fighters operating in normal conditions. He was thinking like an atmospheric pilot who had learned to use chaos as a weapon. At 58,000 feet, Kim encountered the most violent gravity flux zone he had experienced all day. The invisible force grabbed his A-10 and accelerated it forward like a bullet from a gun. His airspeed climbed beyond anything the aircraft was designed to handle. The Vorthok fighters tried to match his sudden acceleration, but their computers could not cope. With the rapid changes in gravitational force, their targeting systems lost lock as the flux zone scrambled their sensors. Kim's cannon fired one final time. The stream of depleted uranium rounds crossed the space between aircraft in milliseconds. At point-blank range, even damaged systems could not miss. Wing Prime. Velkos felt his fighter shudder as 30mm shells tore through his ship's hull. Internal systems exploded in showers of sparks. His energy weapons went offline. His life support failed. His proud spacecraft began its final dive toward the planet's surface. "You fought well, human," he whispered into his radio as his fighter fell burning through the thin atmosphere. Kim's engine finally quit completely. The fuel pump sucked air instead of aviation fuel. The turbofan wound down with a sound like a dying sigh. His A-10 became a glider at 60,000 feet, where the air was too thin to support unpowered flight. The last Vorthok fighter pilot watched in amazement. As the human aircraft began its final descent, the battle was over. Both combatants were falling toward the planet's surface. But somehow, the human had won. Kim fought to control his powerless aircraft as it dropped through the hostile atmosphere. His flight controls barely responded in the thin air. The gravity flux zones that had been his weapons now became deadly, obstacles threatening to tear his plane apart. At 50,000 feet, the air thickened enough to give him some control. Kim managed to level out his descent and aim for a flat section of canyon floor. His landing would be rough, but he might survive it. "Control, this is Bravo 77. Engine failure." Attempting emergency landing in the canyon, Colonel Park Jin-woo heard the transmission from his command bunker. He immediately ordered his forces to secure the crash site. "All units, converge on grid square 77. We have a pilot down." Kim's A-10 hit the rocky ground at over 100 miles per hour. The landing gear had been destroyed hours ago by battle damage. The aircraft slid across the canyon floor in a shower of sparks and flying debris. The tough airframe absorbed the impact that would have killed any other pilot. When the wreckage finally stopped moving, Kim found himself upside down in his harness. Blood ran down his face from a cut on his forehead. His left arm hung at an odd angle, but he was alive. Sergeant First Class Oh Min-jun reached the crash site first. He found Kim hanging unconscious in his cockpit, surrounded by the twisted remains of the aircraft that had saved them all. "Medic," Oh Min-jun shouted. "We need medical assistance immediately." As field medics worked to extract Kim from his wrecked A-10, the full scope of his achievement became clear. 14 Vorthok hover tanks destroyed, 6 aerospace fighters shot down, an entire enemy battalion in retreat, all accomplished by one pilot flying at an altitude that military science declared impossible. The Battle of Canyon 17 became a turning point in the war between humanity and the Vorthok Empire. Human tacticians studied Kim's tactics and developed new doctrines for high-altitude combat. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, scheduled for retirement, received new funding and upgrades. 3 months later, Kim woke up in a hospital bed on Earth. His injuries would prevent him from ever flying combat missions again, but his legacy lived on in every pilot who refused to accept the word impossible. General Lee Seung-min visited. The old soldier sat quietly beside the hospital bed for a long time before speaking. "Major, the Vorthok Empire has ruled space for 800 years. They conquered species more advanced than humanity. They had better technology, faster ships, stronger weapons. But they never faced anyone like you." Kim tried to sit up, but pain shot through his injured ribs. "Sir, I was just doing my job." "No, Major, you were doing something much more important. You were proving that the human spirit cannot be defeated by superior technology or impossible odds. The general stood to leave and paused at the door. The Vorthok are requesting peace negotiations for the first time in their history. They have learned to fear an enemy that refuses to be bound by the limitations others accept. Kim closed his eyes and thought about his old A-10. The aircraft had been destroyed in the crash, but its sacrifice had saved hundreds of lives. Sometimes the best victories came from the oldest weapons and the simplest tactics. Years later, military historians would study the Battle of Canyon 17 as the moment humanity proved itself worthy of the stars. They would note the technical details and tactical innovations, but they would miss the most important lesson: Major Kim. Daeho had not won because he had better equipment or superior numbers. He had won because when faced with a choice between certain death and impossible victory, he chose to make the impossible merely difficult. The Vorthok had called 60,000 feet a death sentence, until a major in an A-10 proved them dead wrong.